What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Social Standard Podcast. My guests today are Michele Quaranta. She is the Senior Social Media Manager for Salesforce, and Ashlyn Remillard, who is the Director of Social Strategy for Salesforce. And today we are getting into how a $250 billion market cap company thinks about influencer marketing. So, ladies, what's up, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah,
hey, Jess, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great conversation. I love the perspective I think that this sort of brings, because we have had a lot of great interviews in the past with different levels and different types of companies in terms of size. Salesforce is definitely the biggest. And for the audience, if you don't know who Salesforce is, if that's possible, you guys are obviously a leading software company in the B2B space. Your main tool is CRM management. That's really how you started, and you've been expanding ever since to provide a huge suite of amazing tools for all sizes and shapes of businesses. And I think one of the things that really drew me to this conversation was the breadth and depth of the influencers that you work with. Everybody from celebrities, like your Dreamforce conference, like will.i.am, I think Spike Lee was there, Ariana Huffington, a lot of different subject matter experts there. You obviously have a very well-known partnership with Matthew McConaughey, but then also social-first creators like Corporate Bro. So with that in mind, I'd pass it to both of you to say, how does a $250 billion market cap company think about influencer marketing? Do you have a framework or guideposts that you use? What does that look like?
I'll kick us off here. A very loaded question, so I'll try and make it as generic as we can. At the end of the day, we had to start with a glossary, right? In marketing, we're all very familiar with how jargon heavy our industry is, right? And so when you say the word influencer in any organization, let alone a very large one, the response back you get is going to be very different depending on their day-to-day work or even mentality or exposure to the industry. So we found off the bat that a lot of our executive stakeholders and business decision makers were not operating off the same definition of the word influencer. So what we did was we started with this glossary to say, here's how we're going to define influencer. And that really landed on influence. And we really approached our execution around it with that term. We talk about it in terms of influence. And we know that, hey, this is a spectrum depending on the business goal or objective at hand. We're going to execute across this spectrum of influence. And there's a ton of different buckets that individuals or audience members or people can fall into when we look at influence. And Michele's been really integral in helping us kind of structure that so that when we are having conversations or we're looking at budgets, how are we defining influence? Who is an influencer? And how do we build a program against those different types of influence?
And I think that's a really common theme that I'm hearing, is that in B2B versus B2C, there's a much different definition. It's much wider. And so I would love for one of you guys to just tell me a little bit about what that definition looks like at Salesforce. What are the buckets that you're talking about specifically that may be different than like what B2C folks say?
Yeah, I'll kind of start, and then I'll throw it over to Ashlyn here, because it starts with our employees. We have employee advocates. We have employees with large followings. We have employees who are SMEs, and they are integral in spreading the message of our brand. And so we want to make sure that we're empowering them through our employee advocacy program to share content. It's a value trade-off for both the brand and for those users, because they become they now have the information and the content that they need at a time that is relevant. Like during Dreamforce, we provide content for them to share. Then we're also looking at our executives. Our executives have a voice. We know that they influence purchasing decisions as well. And so we want to make sure that we're empowering them to be active on social media and any kind of product SMEs or evangelists.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of
SMEs are subject matter experts, right?
Yes, our subject matter experts. Okay. And those can fall both into the product section and into industry.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. So you're thinking about, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so we look at it across that spectrum, right? So the buckets that Michele was outlining, those would be the early side of the spectrum, which would be relationship. We have very strong relationships there. That spectrum can go all the way to reach, where we don't really necessarily have a relationship. It could be a celebrity. It could be someone who doesn't necessarily make sense to our audience immediately, but there's
Okay.
value to the partnership and the narrative that we would have them communicate for us. And I think that spectrum, when you look at budgets, that's going to change drastically too, right? Tight relationships, maybe lower lift budget, all the way to high reach might be a much larger budget. So anything from employees and executives to A-list talent. And then we have what we would traditionally reference as an influencer or maybe a content creator fall somewhere in the middle of that.
Okay. So you guys look at it on the scale of relationship, like how close is that relationship to Salesforce versus all the way out to a Matthew McConaughey style relationship. Okay, that's interesting because when you were talking about it, I was almost classifying it into internal and external buckets, right? Which maybe is another way to kind of more simplistically bifurcate it. But I like the way that you guys are looking at this from on a spectrum effectively. I think that's really smart.
I think, we definitely speak about internal versus external, but it's the middle of that spectrum where things get a little bit muddied. So when we talk about SMEs, we can partner with internal SMEs, but we also have external SMEs that we can partner with. And that's where that cost change is going to come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you can sort of look at the media value that each is providing, and then if there are budget. So obviously there's no, well, I say obviously, but maybe that's not obvious. Is there a budget associated with the employee advocacy program, or like how do you guys think about activating them? I've heard about challenges that people do internally, other support systems. So I don't mean, are you paying your employees? Obviously that's kind of weird, right? But like,
yes,
how are you,
sort of, but
but like incentivizing is a different story, right? And that does come with some sort of budget. So do you guys look at the employee advocacy program with a cost parameter that you can also then compare to like a celebrity program, for example?
Yes, absolutely. There is an ROI associated with it. We have to invest in tools that allow us to enable our employees to share. So that's one part of it. And then there is a gamification side of things. We have to give them incentive. For me to just show up and say, well, it's a value add. You can build your own personal profile isn't always enough. And especially during our big moments and learning when our employees want to share, we want to make sure that we're incentivizing them to share not only when it works for them, but also when it works for the business, because it's a two-way street.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I remember seeing something a while ago that there was a little bit of piece of press where it was saying that basically Salesforce had this really successful employee advocacy program because 25,000 of the 75,000 employees there were actively sharing.
Yeah.
And I know you guys are using tools for that, but like, what does that look like? Is a tool something that sort of puts all the assets in one place? Or is the tool more to go through and like comb LinkedIn to see where employees are sharing so you can kind of capture what that earned media value looks like?
Yes. So it's a platform where we onboard our marketers to post and share content for their initiatives or their campaigns that they're running. Okay. And then we, from a program level, work to onboard all of our employees. So that looks like making sure we're in all of the onboarding materials when an employee starts at Salesforce. It's communicating out on our internal communications on Slack to make sure that people are aware. It's incorporating it into all of our content marketers sharing processes across Slack. So here's an easy link where it's a 2-click process to share. And then most employee advocacy programs that I've looked at, they all calculate an estimated earned media value based on a certain cost per click. Here at Salesforce, we directly update that cost per click based on what we are spending as a brand on our brand channels. And so how I like to position this is that or estimated earned media value that we're getting, that's money back in the pocket of Salesforce for us to go and do cool things like working with other influencers that might be more cost prohibitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then so you go from the employee bucket, then we go to the executive bucket. So how does Salesforce think about How do you guys think about your executives as influencers?
Mm-hmm. So right now, our executives are activating around our big initiatives with the support of our comms teams and our PR team. But we really see that there's a lot of potential to identify more executives. And I think how we define executives is important as well.
Sure.
We have industry executives, and we also have SMEs who are focused on our products that we can enable. And
Sure.
so figuring out, or I should say, identifying who those folks are, and then putting some support behind them if they're not already active, or really just understanding what kind of support do they need in order to allow them to continue to grow their influence, and then identify KPIs based on what we know to be true of their or what we know they can drive for us. So
Sure.
kind of going back into the employee side on our platform, we can look at what users drive the most clicks and what users are driving the most potential impressions. And so based on whatever the goal is of the campaign or the initiative that we're asking them to be a part of, we can then choose who should be a part of our influencer marketing strategy for this specific initiative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like you're testing everyone to kind of see what they're driving. Then once you figure out who has what strengths, you can lean on them. Those are like levers to pull for certain activations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And when you say industry executives, are we talking about like C-suite? Is that what you mean by industry executives?
So we are currently establishing executive as SVP plus here.
Okay, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. We tend to see those are the folks with the larger influence here.
Okay.
Sometimes, and I don't know if we're going to have to cut this out. Sometimes when you get to the C-suite, they need a lot more support because they're very busy. And so it's about the level of support that we can provide them. I've experienced that the lower the level of executive, the more time they might have on their hands and more interested they might be in growing their own personal brand.
That makes perfect sense because we see the same with celebrities, right? You have celebrities who go through and have full teams that follow them around and take photos. I mean, Gary Vee, who is, obviously C-suite and founder, has a full-time team that follows him around 24/7 and creates content. There is no reason to think that a CEO or a C-suite executive would be able to or should be doing this with their time. I mean, as we mentioned before, Salesforce is a colossal company. You guys have shareholders, stakeholders, you have tons of different parties that need that C-suite focus 100% on their mission. This can be part of it in marketing, but they should absolutely have support. I think that if you're approaching it thinking that a CEO, a CMO, a CRO is just going to go on LinkedIn and write LinkedIn posts in his or her free time, you're doing it wrong.
Exactly.
Of all the companies I've interviewed, I've yet to find one, unless they're like, founder stage, early stage companies, they're not doing that. And so I just think that's a misstep if you think that's how it's going to go down.
I think a tiered, sorry.
No, go ahead.
One last thing. I think a tiered approach is important when you're thinking about executive support, because again, everyone will just need different types of support based on their bandwidth.
Yeah, and also not even just bandwidth, like what are their strengths, right? Some people might be really great at talking, not so great at writing. And so I think instead of penalizing people by saying, oh, you have to do this type of content, it's like, no, lean into their strengths, right? We have that same thing at the Social Standard where I love the podcast. I do the podcast, okay? My CRO, he also loves to talk. He's a sales guy, obviously, but he gets crazy with the editing process, can't handle it. So what he does is he does LinkedIn Lives. There's no editing there. It's done and gone, right? So it leans into his strength and what he desires to do with his time, and it's been really effective. Whereas for me, I love the podcast, I love the edits, I love all that stuff. So we do it that way, right? I think as a leader, I always say, why penalize people for their weaknesses? Support their strengths, and that's how you shine. So Ashlyn, I don't know what you'd like to add to that, but I'd be interested on your POV as well.
No, I love that. When we were talking about executives and social and CEOs and their content, whether regardless of your goal for it. I was just going to bring up the brand trust associated with it. And so how we know
Mm-hmm.
consumers value hearing from leaders and what that does for the brand outside of our internal metrics and business needs or the solutions we're
Right.
looking for. Studies show how much it increases brand trust when they can hear directly from that level of leader and that level of leadership. So that's just one of the reasons why we value it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've seen it, across many different industries, right? If you go back 5 years, we were not hearing directly from Mark Zuckerberg, right? But fast forward to today, and he's on broadcast channels sharing out news and all sorts of stuff. And you feel a closer connection to him, even though it's not really true, right? He doesn't know who I am, he doesn't know I'm reading the broadcast stuff, but I read it all the time. And it does feel like you are in a little bit more in the know with them. And I think that the relationship piece of it is a big deal. And, whether they like it or not, I think that a lot of C-suite executives are becoming formidable celebrities in their own right. And that's sort of the trend that's the path that the internet is on. Right?
Yes. And I think this will be a nice segue into some of the external influencer stuff, but what you're experiencing is that authenticity that you get with influencer marketing. You're hearing
Yep.
it from the source, and it resonates with the audience so much more than a brand saying, "Hey, look at us, look at what we're doing."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. And I think that's something that certainly leaders can learn from the B2C community, right? Building those communities, building that trust, and that ultimately has allowed them to sell products and courses and all sorts of things. And really, at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to do in the business world. So I think it's kind of interesting, and I think it's got to be humbling too for execs to dip their toe in the water and kind of see what this is all about. Right? It's a weird world, content creation, and it feels like everything so easy. When you sit on the outside, you're like, oh, of course, this is how you do it. It's these steps and this, that, and build a great community. But when you actually get down to it, it's actually really hard to do. And so, I applaud the Salesforce execs and everyone, all the execs for leaning into it and really trying to make that effort, because I do think it's going to pay off in droves. I think that's the trend. That's where the internet is going. And if you want to be relevant in this space in the next 5 years, you've got to start building your presence now. So with that, I would love to move a little bit more to how you guys think about external influencers, building the brand, and also, the clicks and the conversions and all that sort of stuff. How do you think about influencers externally for Salesforce?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, it takes us back to influence, and we have a ton of different business needs, and we look at leveraging external influencers based on the solution we're trying to solve for. At the end of the day, every one of our programs are different. Our audiences are very different depending on product or message or really what we're trying to achieve. You brought up something a couple minutes ago that was really interesting, and I think that was like the differentiating between B2B and then B2C and what we can learn from the consumer world. And I think that's an approach we're taking internally is really not industryfying ourselves, right? Like how we aren't classifying ourselves as, oh, this is B2B marketing and this is B2B influencer marketing, and really allowing us to keep the audience at the center and really understanding our audience depending on who it is we're trying to reach or what we're trying to get them to do or think or feel. And at the end of the day, when we can really align and focus and set our sights on that audience member as a human, it changes everything. It takes us out of industry. It takes us out of B2B. It doesn't place us in B2C, but what it does is it allows us to stay grounded in honoring them, where they are, the spaces they are, how they're showing up. And it lets us check our industry, our bias, our marketing jargon at the door and say, we know you, we get you, we are you, and we understand the channels and the spaces you're operating in. So if we're going to show up there, it's not necessarily going to be brand first, right? We're not going to come in, knock the door over, beat our chest and say, oh, we're here, Reddit's hot. Oh, we're here, this Discord is popping off. We want to be here. We know you're here. We might say, we actually don't have a role here, but so-and-so does. And we know that you value what they think. And we've worked with them before and they get us. So what does that look like if we were to partner with them so that they can show up for you and truly provide value? Here's the value we think we can provide in some of this messaging. And that's how we're looking at those external programs. That's how we're bringing them to market. It's how we're deciding who we do and don't partner with, right? Who we don't
100%.
partner with sometimes is as important as who we do
Hmm.
in the role or the channel. And that's going to vary, as I said before, depending on the business solution we're after.
Yes. And I think that's so smart because, even though we do sit here, I told you earlier, we launched a B2B influencer division. So, but I look at it the same way. It's not, are you a B2B influencer? Are you a B2C influencer? Like, where are you? It's, how are you showing up on the internet? And are you entertaining? Are you connecting with your customer? Are you building community? It doesn't really matter if it's B2B or B2C. I do think that they're going to do it slightly differently, and that's good. But you're right. And it's great that you guys are thinking this a little bit more holistically and not just sort of pigeonholing yourself. And the other thing that I noticed you were talking about as well is you're sort of like meeting people where they're at, where your customer is at on their journey. If they're a current customer, they need one set of things. If they are a potential customer, that's a much different journey. And so finding the right influencers to take them on that journey is absolutely it's the classic use of influencer marketing, right? So well done that you guys have sort of figured that out. At the stage in the game, I'm impressed to hear the way that you talk about this because I think it is really so spot on. And for better or worse, I think you guys are, a lot of B2B companies are very behind on that. But it seems like Salesforce is leading the pack, and I can tell that from the influencers that you use. But to hear you say it is really incredible as well.
Don't get me wrong, there's a huge opportunity for growth here. And I'll tell you,
Always.
Jess, we are just getting started. And so that's kind of what I think motivates Michaela and I is we know
Yeah.
we're barely scratching the surface. We all
Sure.
know if you've ever been in this industry, how hard stakeholder alignment is, as you mentioned at the start, like getting getting a line item on these budgets
Yes.
because influencers aren't cheap and good ones
Right.
especially, right? And yes, there's a combination and I'm going to date myself here, but micro, macro, et cetera, however you're going to reference them. And we
Sure.
understand that the budget's changed by that, but depending on what you're trying to achieve, we've got to be able to sell that in. You've got to be able to
Yes.
bring people along the way. We talk about this all the time. We have to build friends internally to help them
Hmm.
see, hey, our goals are still the same. We're still trying
Right.
to achieve what you're trying to achieve. It's just going to look different when we do it over here. And you've got
Hmm.
to trust that. You've got to trust the partners. You've got to trust their voice and tone and their audience. And it may not sound like we would do it if we were putting it on an own channel. So that level of
Right.
education is definitely, still taking place. But we're very excited about the future of influence at Salesforce. We're very much looking forward to growing this practice and this arm. And we're looking at the industry. We're watching how rapidly it's changing. And we want to be a part of that in a positive motion and take the good that's out there and see how we can build that to truly better our customers' lives, better their customers' lives, and continue to be able to provide that value.
Yes, 100%. And I do want to, Michaela, I'll let you say this. I just want to, one point of emphasis for our listeners. If you didn't pick up on it, I obviously am saying influencer marketing. What they are saying is influence marketing. And I think that, especially in the world of B2B, is a really important differentiator, one I might have to take myself, because there are so many people who have great influence, but do not yet have a digital presence. And it would be a shame to not include them in your overall influence plan. So,
Absolutely. I mean, there's a conversation we're having internally when we define one of our primary audiences as business decision makers. And I think so often
yes.
you think of a business decision maker and you think C-suite, right? They're the ones stroking the checks. They're at the top, maybe below them, SVPs, VP level. But one of our largest CMO leaders here at Salesforce, Colin Fleming, he has a stat, I'm going to butcher it, I'm not even going to go, but somewhere around 80% of business decision makers tend to go with brands and products and services that they were initially introduced to. So for us in social, that kind of gives us the permission to play into any business mindset. Hey, I'm a coordinator. Hey, I'm a senior manager. Because what we know about influence, they're having conversations. They may not be stroking the check and they may not be the final decision maker, but they are influencing in their internal walls and in the break rooms and on Zooms and Slacks and all of the different communication channels. They are influential, even if they're not the final influence.
Exactly.
And so that really gives us a lot more freedom when we look at social, depending on the different demographics based on the channels, who's where. It makes our jobs fun and exciting.
Yes, 100%. And I think that is so smart to pick up on, because the reality is, I even think about it in my own agency. I'm not the one that's deciding which tools we work with. It's my team that I empower to say, okay, what tools do you need to do this job effectively? Sure, I have to approve ultimately the budget, but they're the ones that decide, right? And they can make a case, and I am absolutely influenced by them, no question. So I do know that LinkedIn loves to get wrapped up in talking about how they have all these decision makers and C-suite folks on here, but I think you're right. And I really think that it is that middle management level that is the ripest for B2B influencer marketing, or just influence marketing, as you guys call it. That to me is the power middle. And that's exactly what was happening in B2C for a long time. I always talked about the power middle, because those are the guys I think that really ultimately drive the decisions.
I love that.
Right?
I definitely just wrote that down. The power middle. That's amazing.
I love it. Michaela, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I wanted to speak to our global the global aspect here, but
Yes.
before I move on, because Ashlyn just reminded me of a conversation we had. I think when we're thinking about influence as well, Ashlyn mentioned yesterday, this is the first time in history that we have 7 generations in the workforce. Is that right, Ashlyn?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of an old stat, so who knows as quickly as our world changes what it is now.
Well,
But the most generations we've ever had working together, from Gen Z all the way to traditionalists, so even a couple above boomers, we've never had that many people working together. And they exchange information very differently. Any generation, right? So if I'm going to send a Slack to a millennial, I might send an email to a boomer, right? Very stereotypical here, just for shock and awe, but we're all exchanging differently. And so when we're looking at our different audiences or the messages we're trying to communicate, we're considering that.
Yeah.
You know, I had never truly thought about that. I feel like you just pulled in a lot of different articles that I have been reading lately, just about that different. And I know Gen Z gets a lot of they get a lot of poked fun at, right? I mean, it used to be the millennials. I'm a millennial. I know we all set through it, right? And now it's Gen Z who's taken on it's becoming the proverbial I don't know what you want to call it these days, but basically they get made fun of a lot, right? So, but the reality is, if you want to be on TikTok, you better have a Gen Zer on your team, because if not, it's a wasted time and effort. So I always say everyone from, intern to C-suite has value to add in your marketing department. You just have to extract it, and good leaders extract it, right? We don't sit here and poke fun at what people can't do. So I think that's smart. And I love that. Is that stat something you're saying globally, as in all across the world? Or are you saying specifically at Salesforce?
Across the world. We don't know that stat yet. And that's a data. That's definitely a 2020 or earlier or sooner stat, but that's a global marketplace.
Yeah. Wow. Super, super interesting stuff. Okay. Well, you take the power middle. I'm going to take that stat, and we'll both see what we can do with it. Okay. Michaela, back to what you were going to say.
So something we always have to think about here is, how do we scale any program globally? We have marketing teams active in EMEA, APAC, LATAM, Japan, and they all need to be served in different ways across all of this influence marketing. And so how do we empower them to activate their own influencers? And so whenever we're building on an initiative like this, we have to think both at the activation level, which we're doing, but you also have to think at the program level. How are you building a program that can scale, that can empower people across the entire company to do the same thing, but in a localized way that speaks to their audience? Because not only are we talking about the different generations that we're speaking to, but we're also talking about culturally, how are we talking to different people and different audiences?
Right. And I would think influencers would be influencers on from all the way from employees to external influencers have got to be a great lever for you guys to pull when you want to communicate. Again, coming back to that word, which is the Oxford word, I think, of the year, authentically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't necessarily considered all of those. It's funny because I feel like you can start to split hairs almost with all of the custom if you want to do it as a brand. But if you do go back to influencers, it's like, great, here's my messaging. Let's find the right people, and they're going to take care of the rest for me, really. It's a very efficient way to lean into that hyper-personalization that I think the internet is serving so well right now. I think one of the, I had a question. I'm not sure if this makes perfect sense. I might come back to it in a little bit here, but just thinking about, well, let's do it now. So one of the things that I have sort of been thinking or been seeing a little bit in my own corner of the internet is it does seem to me that Europe, and I can't speak to Asia or anywhere else, but Europe seems to be ahead of the US in terms of B2B influencers. It seems like that's a train that has already left the station, whereas we're just getting started in the US. Is that something you guys are seeing? Am I totally off base here?
It's not something that I've experienced from actually, let me back up. From an employee side, sure. Yes, they use employee advocacy quite a bit. We have a much smaller employee base in EMEA, but they utilize our employee advocacy platform just as much and produce just as much as our Americas team. And part of that is also due to restrictions that they have on
outreach, right? Cold emailing.
Yes. Restrictions they have on outreach. So we have a lot of sales folks in EMEA. Social outreach and branding is a really great way for them to build sales. And they're a key player on our employee advocacy platform.
Yes. And that makes a lot of sense. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, is that must be the reason why, is that people seem at least more receptive to it internationally than they do in the US. And that could definitely be a reason why. So that's a theory I continue to kind of like ask around on, because like I said, just in my corner of the internet, it does feel like I follow a lot of people specifically for some reason in the UK. It feels like there are a lot of influencers there. So, and just when I think about, you mentioned, Ashlyn, that you guys are just sort of getting started in this. How long has Salesforce had an influencer marketing program in place that you know of?
Ooh, that's a tough question. It's a little bit nuanced, because you will be able to post past date and see influencer marketing initiatives and campaigns. We by no means were the first to ever do this within our organization, but as it relates to social as a center of excellence in a department and like a purposeful approach, I'd say a calendar year, to be honest. One calendar year.
I will add there, though, that something that has been a core part of Salesforce's business strategy long before Ashlyn or I were here is Trailblazer marketing. And that is influence marketing. They are on our scale of influence, and customer marketing is influence.
And those are your stands, basically, right? Your hardcore fans.
Yes. And they are also partners, and they work in the industry. They implement Salesforce for us. And we have an entire marketing team that's done an amazing job at fostering that community and providing them with support that allows them to be a voice for us. And it's one of the reasons that Salesforce is really successful today.
Yeah. And I see that, I don't know if this was before or after, but I also see that pretty heavily with HubSpot. As you guys, I think, know, I had Rob Jones on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he talked a lot about, edutainment and the emotional side of that selling. And he is effectively, he's a third-party company that operates off of the HubSpot implementation. So Trailblazers is effectively your version, Salesforce's version of that, right?
Exactly.
Just so people understand. Yeah. And I think that's so interesting, too, because you guys have all of these advocates out there shouting for Salesforce on your behalf. So that's, those are whole other marketing dollars. So that sort of brings me to my next question, which is, what's your measurement look like, right? Because if you've just started, I'm sorry, I don't want to say just started, but if it's been about a year since you've had the real sort of chops to go after this, I assume that comes with a budget. And I assume that, we're in December of 2023 when we're shooting. So the reckoning is coming, right? People want to look at like, how'd you guys do? What's influencer marketing ROI? How do you guys think about that?
Yep. So in all honesty, we're still in this experimentation phase.
Sure.
What we know that influencers help us reach outside of the tent. We know that there's power in their impressions that they're providing us. We look at the cost in which we're spending for impressions and for click through when we put paid media behind their content. And we're looking at what are there cost savings behind influencer content that we might not see when we're putting money behind brand content. And so we're still learning as we go, and we're still working with our partners across the company to understand what makes sense for us. I think that's really important. And this is just more general for analytics. There's a core understanding of what should metrics for influencers be, what do they drive. But at the end of the day, you also have to make sure you're incorporating what works for your business, because we all know when you work in social, there are so many metrics available to you, and you can kind of get lost in all of that sometimes. And so it's layering on, what do we know that they should be used for, and then what's working for us.
Yes, and that makes sense. And what's working for you could be, are they getting us, how far outside of the tent are they getting us? Or we have a new product demo that we want people to do. So who can drive demos for us, right? Those are two very simplistic examples. But I would imagine that you guys are finding different types of influencers do those things very well, but no one does it all.
Yes. And we may see, I think too, this is where the strategy comes in. We're going to see that our niche influencers who are subject matter experts, focused on specific products or industries, they may be driving more traffic for us. But then we get into this macro, large following, talent, and reach is going to be their strong point. And so what those KPIs are going to be per activation may change. What are right. Tier 1 versus tier 2? And I think that's just important to consider. We also will look at brand lift. Now, brand lift can sometimes be difficult to pinpoint exactly when you're a company of this size. We have so many things going on at one time, a lot of different campaigns in the market. So we can say, hey, we did this activation, this sponsorship was happening, this event was happening, we can point to them, but we can't always pinpoint exactly unless we're getting a little bit more direct feedback through a survey.
Yeah. And that makes sense, right? And I know you had talked a little bit previously about like this halo effect that you guys look for. So can you tell us a little bit about the halo effect?
Yes. So we talk about how influence creates this halo effect around your brand and your messaging. And I think about Trailblazer marketing when we think about this too, because that is what the purpose and the idea was behind Trailblazer marketing. They're creating this halo effect around our brand, and they're advocates for us. And then so is influence. So we're spreading that farther and farther. I think the big question is like, how do we pinpoint that? How do we... it's not easy when you're sharing on Twitter and it's not connected to a specific name. How do you start to connect that halo effect with the folks that you're actually activating with? I think that's still yet to be determined for us. But, we can also look at share of voice in that sense too. Like, what are we seeing spikes when we're activating across these influencers?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, to me, it almost sounds like, look, you're right. We are still in the beginning of stages of all of this. And the reality is it's test and learn, right? And there's so much happening. I think even if I just consider LinkedIn, it's like you have so many avenues even on LinkedIn to do things, right? You can do a LinkedIn Live if you want. You can have someone promote content on a white paper, on industry research, on a product launch, on attending Dreamforce. You can use newsletters. You can use podcasts. Like, there are so many tools at your beck and call. But the question is, what's going to move the needle for you guys, right? I'm guessing you've done a lot on LinkedIn. I'm guessing, I know, even the Salesforce account is huge on LinkedIn. So you guys have done a lot on LinkedIn, but have you explored podcasts at all? And I don't mean internally created podcasts. I mean partnering with podcast influencers.
Not to my knowledge. I think, as we talk about metrics, and you'll see naturally in influence as an industry, brand awareness is usually one of the largest ones. There are a couple different business needs and solutions that we look at when we're launching or activating any of these campaigns. And one thing we haven't really touched on yet is this creator economy, right? Understanding that in-house advertising costs are outpacing the creator economy. And so when we're partnering with some of these influencers or content creators, if you will, looking at them not just for their name, image, likeness influence, but also their creative ability, right? Sometimes we can partner with someone for the actual piece of content. So as you bring up podcasts, it's an incredible area for us to look at, from the skill sets, the equipment, the time to launch and market, in addition to the typical metrics you would track, the branded ROI, prioritization around awareness marketing, and what different channels or what different levels are we pulling for the type of content we want to see to come out of it. Because I absolutely think there's value for brands with creators who have limited resources, or we all know how tight bandwidth can be. How are we maximizing that internally?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think influencers provide that, right? Not only do they provide the reach, they provide the content. And I think that if you are not leveraging the content that they provide in a paid capacity, or supporting with paid, maybe better said, you're missing out on a lot, because we all know that influencer content performs way better than branded content. It just does, right?
And one thing I'll add, and Ashlyn preaches this all the time internally, we want to focus on shared spaces. I think if we box ourselves into social, then we're not including podcasts. Social media is a tactic to get that creation out, but what is the shared space that they're creating for us? Whether it's a podcast, maybe it's a Twitch live stream, and then they're sharing it out on YouTube or LinkedIn. I think that's really important. Don't limit yourself to where you're activating this influence marketing.
Exactly, because they can have it everywhere, right? And Ashlyn, go ahead. Yeah.
Or just back to glossaries, right? When I say social media, what comes to mind? If you say that on the street, you're going to get Facebook or X, Twitter, maybe Instagram, TikTok, if you will. But at the end of the day, that term is so limiting to us as marketers and as advertisers, right? And when we open our thinking up to the shared space notion, this concept, it allows us to operate against spaces, primarily digitally, where people are coming together to exchange information, right? Social started one-to-one, then grew one-to-many, then one-to-few, kind of is where we are right now. And this shared space concept allows us to not just think platform or channel, but think behavior. What am I doing? Why am I showing up there? Another outdated stat for you, man. I need to get into some trades, get my stats updated. But a few years ago, we could say that the average social media user had around 8 different profiles, whether that's across platform or multiple profiles on one channel. But what we know about that user is that every time they are logging into a different profile that they've created, they are bringing a very different version of themselves. So who you see of me on LinkedIn and who you see of me on TikTok is going to look very different. I'm different. So as marketers, our job is understanding who you are in that space, not just who you are by your basic demographics, your age, and what have you, what we would traditionally run to. So we're really hyper-focused. Audience. We want to get you. We want to understand you. We want to be in community with you, because that's the only way we're going to be able to provide you value. And if we're not doing that, what are we doing? What are we doing
exactly
here? Like, we're not, we can't just be noise. We can't just be clutter. You're not adding value. And in return, we're not getting value. So those are just a couple internal philosophies that we have, and really just kind of how we look at social as a whole and in general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do love that, because I think if we've seen that play out this year, right? With Twitter or X versus Threads, right? Who you are, all the memes going around with, like, who I am on Instagram, very different than who I am on X. And I think that
even
you're right
within Instagram, right? Like all the Finstas and who has access to what private accounts and what's taking place in forums. And I mean, Reddit's a whole nother beast when you look at brand presence there. So it's super nuanced. It keeps it exciting. It makes our jobs hard internally trying to explain this to people who aren't in those spaces every day. But that's part of the fun. I think that's what we love so much about what we get to do every day.
Oh, absolutely. I think social is not boring, for sure. And I think that you point to two trends that I think are really, really big in the space. One is that influencers are transitioning quickly to media companies, right? They are the new media company. As you point out, they are in all these different spots, creating all these different things. And so Michaela, to piggyback on your thing as well, it's like, look, if we're just saying, oh, you have a following on LinkedIn, we're only going to partner with you on LinkedIn, you might be missing a whole podcast, right, section. You might be missing a whole newsletter audience that's really tapped in. So looking at influencers, big influencers, as packages, media packages versus just one single spot. And Ashlyn, looks like you got something to add.
We were just talking about this. This is something that we haven't truthfully I have not figured out, but we are actively learning and seeking to understand better. What's the role of sponsored content within influencer content, right? So we were having this conversation around one of the creator classes that we love. MLB runs a creator class. They were executing them at All-Star. They're all on the ground, all the different creators working together, but then independently. And then they're tacking on additional deals while they're there. So let's say Nike's a sponsor. That same creator who one brand is paying for to be there, another brand is sponsoring content that's honoring both their messages. And then they're getting more revenue across all parties, just growing together. Have not figured that out and what that means for us, but it is something we are seeking to learn because we want to be able to provide more value, provide value to our sponsors as well and to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. That collaboration, I think, is a big one. And that's probably, I know B2C has figured that out pretty well, and we've seen it everywhere, but there's definitely space in the B2B world for that, no question. And I think, you can see collaboration in a lot of different venues, but I even love it through the vein of influencers as media companies, because they are likely the ones that can bring two brands together because they're speaking to both sides, right? Wow. Yeah, that is super powerful stuff. And I'd be wrong if I said I had considered that before, but I don't think I really had. So, yeah, no, definitely. There's no question. Michaela, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that or not, but, we
certainly haven't figured it out, but like we mentioned before, it's the curiosity of all of this, right?
Yes.
As a strategist, we live and breathe on heart and science, and that's no different here. It's what keeps us going, and there's beauty in not having it figured out.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the most fun time, is it not? I mean, to be able to sort of be part of that conversation, to be part of the movement that is building out this road is really interesting. And I think the second sort of trend that I was alluding to earlier is really that social itself is maturing. I was telling someone that I think the internet's kind of in its teenage years, right? Where it's going through a big time identity crisis in like who's providing what and who's doing what. Like Facebook, Instagram, all these platforms are no longer social media, they're entertainment media. I think we can all agree with that. But we're moving social to dark social. There are just things are happening. It's like, are you an e-commerce platform? Are you a competitor with Netflix? Like, what are you? Right? And they're all a bunch of teenagers figuring out who they are and what the value is that they're going to bring. But I think what's really interesting specifically for social on that is that social media, like what we would almost call that 5 years ago, today is it's eating digital marketing's lunch, right? And so it's coming. Social media, all you digital marketers out there, social media is coming for you. Prepare. But like it really is. And I see that through growing budgets. I see that, even the way that both of you are talking about influence marketing, right? Social media is a part of that, but it's not the whole thing. It's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that is just, man, what an exciting time to be in this.
Yeah. You see it in org charts, right?
Yeah.
Social media on the way up, quickly becoming your most valuable CMO because of people like Michaela who are figuring out how we can attribute our sales and our growth and our metrics to really driving business forward. It's not, it is community and it is play and it is edutainment, but it is also driving business impact. And at the end of the day, that's why you're seeing that growth, and that's why it's showing up in org charts and on budget line items.
And kudos to you, Michaela, because that is not an easy. It's not an easy job, right?
But
I will say, I think
far from cracking it. If anyone has the golden ticket, I'll take it at this point. But
I don't think anyone does. I do think that it's something that we're all sort of battling, and I even see that on our B2B clients. It's kind of a Jacqueline Hyde, like brand awareness. Oh no, my God, what's the ROI? Like it's back and forth, right? The question I have for you then is, what does the social org chart look like at Salesforce? You know, I mean, if it's evolving, like what does it look like? How are you guys structured? And I'm sure that's changed a lot even since you've joined.
Yes, I think it's constantly changing just because same with metrics and ROI, we're just always trying to figure it out. I think it depends too on how you want your business to function. Um, Ashlyn and I sit on the corporate social team. We run the Center of Excellence with our teammates, and we try to set a standard. But we do all that in hopes to empower social practitioners across the entire company to work quickly with their stakeholders and be able to really move at the speed of social. That is so important today. And we have to avoid heavy levels of approvals. I think that's really important too. So we kind of have a hub of the corporate social team, and then we have practitioners across the entire company that sit under products, industries that work directly with those stakeholders so that they can really move quickly, have content at their fingertips, influence the content that's going out, make sure that they're getting the assets that they need as well for social specific marketing.
Yeah. And do you know, I mean, is social getting a seat at the table at the campaign level? Like when you guys are coming up with campaigns is social involved in that conversation, or is that something you guys, at a battle you're still trying to figure out?
No, I feel like social is involved in those conversations. I think with a company of this size, it's always an ongoing effort. You know, new people come in, old people leave. You have to make sure that you're building relationships here. That's very important. And you also have to make sure that your executives are bought in on social media. I think everything trickles down when you're at a company of this size, and it's really important. But yes, social absolutely has a seat at the table. And as you know, our CEO is very active on X, and he clearly values social media as well. So we're very lucky here that we get to influence what we're producing.
Yeah. And I think that's the right approach. So kudos to you guys for figuring that out. I think my sort of last influencer marketing style question for you guys, if you can share this, is like, how do you think about a Matthew McConaughey relationship versus like a corporate bro relationship? Like, is it the same team figuring that stuff out, or are celebrities somewhere else and social influencers are kind of housed by another team?
Ashlyn's right here now. Let me have her pop in and answer that question.
Okay. So my question is, when you guys think about influencers like a Matthew McConaughey or a Spike Lee, you've got, those are obviously celebrities versus influencers that are social first, that are a little bit more like a corporate bro. Like, how do you guys think about those differently? Are they different teams that approach that? Does it all really funnel through the same team? And I know obviously someone like a McConaughey is awareness, but it's got to be more than that.
Yeah, it is so much more than that. There are a ton of different teams that are a part of pretty much everything we work on at Salesforce. So there's absolutely a million different people involved in those decision-making processes and creative teams and back to business needs and solutions, what we're trying to achieve with that partnership. They all look very different. The level of partnership is very different. And it's all just strategically placed on the type of business solution that we're looking for and what we're trying to achieve within that. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even trying to dance around it. I'm trying to think of how much more specific I could be. Well, when you work with certain levels of talent that involves different people internally. We do work with influencer networks. We also just have really strong relationships from past programs, and with a company this size, internal relationships. We have great talent teams. We have great event teams. So again, depending on the business need and solution, would kind of almost like matrix who would do what and who works together with whom, and kind of how that gets brought to life.
Okay.
So,
and do you guys think about do you think, is digital following a big deal for you guys? Like, when you're thinking about influencers, do you care if someone do they have to have more than 500,000 followers on LinkedIn? Or do you what does that look like? Because I know the old, kind of going back to your generational question, old school mindset would say, we want someone big and bold. And that's not even old school. That's not fair to say that. That's a traditional approach, right?
You know firsthand when you look at results and who's moving the needle, what level of influence does that. And that's mid-tier all day long, every day. Harder to sell that into stakeholders for sure. personal POV, not saying this is a Salesforce one,
Sure.
I am not here for the vanity metrics, period. I am so in tune with audience and so hyper focused on who they are and what they need from us. I don't actually care about some of these other things depending on the program.
Sure.
So reach is great. It's important. I think channel matters, and vanity metrics across channels mean different things. So I'll give you an example. If you understand TikTok, I don't care how many followers you have, you get the trending sound right, you get the video edit correct, you're using the right tool to edit, your caption overlay is built for SEO and it's super great. Your videos are going to outperform someone who has 10 times your following. And you can see that, right? When you're in a casting, you'll see really high following on TikTok and you'll start looking at their video views and their comments and you're like, this doesn't track. The reverse is true. You could see someone who hasn't quite established a quote following on TikTok. The engagement on their posts trends almost every time they post something because they understand their audience and what they're doing. That's how we're looking at these lenses when we're in some of these casting for specific activations and executions.
Yeah.
But yeah, miss me with your vanity metrics, please. I'm sure there are people who feel very differently.
Yeah.
It is just like, it's a hot thing for me right now.
Yes. I think it's a hot thing for everyone in the B2B space, especially because there just aren't that many people who are north of 500,000. You know what I mean? There are, but there aren't, right? Because once you start getting down into like filtering, say, are they relevant for my business? Are they a good fit? Does tone of voice work? What type of content can they share? You start to get a more limited pool. And so I do think we have to have flexibility there. But yeah, I think a lot of people are talking about vanity metrics because I think that we are in that sort of influencer 1.0.
It's easy. And a lot of us come from advertising backgrounds where that matters. We care about that. We want that return on ad spend to be super low and to be competitive against other programs. That's why I think it's so crucial to, in the upfront, align on what your business goals and objectives are. What business solutions are you solving for? And that can help show stakeholders this particular metric may not be as important to this campaign. Not saying it's not important to measure. It may work for other programs, but for this particular space or this group of people, this is what's going to be important for us to know we've been successful.
Yes, 100%. What's your number one platform for social media and B2B for 2024?
Shared spaces. It's
just all shared spaces.
We are all so nuanced as humans, and we have so many important messages to share depending on the business that you're running, who your customer is. Right? Our goal is to help you be better for your customer. And as we understand we understand your customer better. Those spaces are everywhere. I can't even give you one. My goal for 2024 is, as marketers, we can stop limiting ourselves to social media and start honoring our consumers and our customers where they already are. That's an array of spaces. We want the breadth here. Depth isn't quite as important right now for us.
I felt like in the beginning that was a total cop-out answer, but as you kept going, I was like, damn, she's right. Damn, she's right.
I'm super passionate. Cop-out is really hard for me. But I do think it's a little bit untraditional thinking. And I think, the more established you've been in the space, because I can be honest, I come from B2C, I come from agency world. And so you find people who are very set in their ways, and for good reason. They've had success. We're here to push boundaries. We're here to do things not necessarily the way they've always been done, but what's right for who we're doing it for. And you've heard me say it 100 times. If we can keep the audience at the center, you're not going to lose.
100%. Okay, last question for you. What's the biggest challenge for you in influencer marketing?
Money, budgets, and stakeholders. I mean, talk to anyone in social media. The hardest part of our jobs is that everyone else has social media. So everyone you're talking to, everyone your stakeholders, everyone's got a profile, everyone's got a platform. When you're in the over the top advertising industry, not everyone has access to a billboard. So they're not challenging your billboard, your out of home messages, the buys you're placing. They're not challenging that because they don't feel like they're good at it. But when every single one of your stakeholders is a social media user themselves, our job gets challenging. So we need trust, we need budget, and we need to trust our partners. So when we do contract with an influencer for a reason, we got to do a better job of not putting our branded messages on their platform. We're reaching out to them for something. Honor that. Let them go be great. We can be great on our own channels. We don't need to be great on their channel. they need to be great on their channel.
Mic drop,
right?
Mic
They're
drop
great for a
moment,
reason.
mic drop moment.
So that's my 2024. Those are our roadblocks. Those are our challenges. I think we've got the best team to do it. Super excited on the success that we have had this year in such a small amount of time. We've started slow. We're putting the gas down. So we're going to go fast. That's not a plug to our F1 partnership, but we're going to go fast.
I love it. That's amazing. That's so incredible. Well, look, I know you guys have to hop. It was wonderful to chat with you. Thank you much for sharing your POVs here in the space. We are going to be looking for what you guys are doing in 2024, and we'll be rooting for you. So thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you both for
Jess,
coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.